go through the whole story of the UAW all the way back from the 1930s, and then we'll end on how the UAW is affecting us today and what's going on in the larger car industry because of the UAW.
Yeah.
All right?
So
I'll let you begin.
Okay, so how did the UAW happen? UAW was founded in 1935, right? So you've got the auto industry in the US is just starting to kick off. Obviously, you have Henry Ford, who is this industrial legend, building up all these factories, specifically in the Midwest, and Detroit is kind of the home, the main enclave for this. And the UAW forms to represent the workers. 1935, FDR is in office, right? So he's a very pro-worker, pro-union president. They have the environment ready. And quickly, the UAW gains a reputation as a fighting union.
Oh, yeah. They spawned out of the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, right? They spawn out of the AFL, but the AFL has some problems. The AFL is very focused on craft workers, on skilled labor workers, and kind of looks down on the non-skilled factory-style workers.
Okay.
So at this 1935 convention for the AFL, a group of industrial workers form their side organization led by John L. Lewis, who led the United Mine Workers. And he founded the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, in combination with the UAW. This is the more militant wing of the labor movement.
Okay.
And the AFL expels the CIO from the AFL in 1936 for being too militant, for being too explosive or too expansive to the unskilled laborer.
Wow.
So there's this massive fight between the CIO and the AFL. Today, we see our posters, it says AFL-CIO, but they were split for a long time. They've only come back together in the 70s.
Okay.
So that is how intense the UAW really was in this beginning moment here.
Yeah. And the battles between unions and the companies on the other side were so intense, like so much more than we could even imagine. There were violence.
Oh, like, dude,
Yeah, they were violent consistently. And the UAW gained their reputation because they would fight off armed thugs and local police hired by companies to come and shut them down.
Yes. The perfect example of this is in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
So Flint, Michigan is where in 1936, the UAW basically invents is the strong word there, but really makes this a prominent strategy called the sit-down strike. And what the sit-down strike does, that's different from all other types of strikes, is that instead of the workers not going to work, instead of the workers picketing outside, the unions would sit down in the workplace, physically occupy the plant, and forcibly keep management and others out by remaining inside of the factory. That made sure that the bosses couldn't bring in strike breakers. Yeah. This got so intense and large that these unions started to elect their own mayors inside of the factories to keep things in order. They had their own sanitation teams. They had their own postal service teams. They even set up little judicial systems for rule breakers and would punish people to clean dishes, or in the worst case scenario, kick them out of the strike.
That's insane.
They literally took over these buildings.
Yeah.
And what I think is so great about the sit-down strike in 1936 is a lot of the meals that these guys were eating were actually supplied by the outside community for free in solidarity with the workers.
Wow.
And
that's
so,
awesome.
Like you were saying with the violence, dude, the police, oh my God, they were in General Motors' pocket for this.
Yeah.
In their pocket, dude. At one point, the local police used tear gas and tried to force their way into the factory, but the workers were just throwing bottles at them, pushing them out of the building. The vice president to Roosevelt actually wanted to use the army to break the strike. The vice president to Franklin Roosevelt wanted Roosevelt to throw the army at him, and Roosevelt said no.
Holy shit.
Love Roosevelt for that, man.
That's
FDR.
insane.
Court orders eventually ordered the union to leave the premises, but they ignored it. And what I love about this is they waited for the perfect time to do it. What do I mean by that? So this strike only went on after Frank Murphy started his term as Michigan's governor. Why was this a good idea? Because Frank Murphy beat an incumbent Republican and was a worker-ish friendly governor. And because of that, Governor Murphy sent in the Michigan National Guard, not to evict the workers, but to protect the workers from the local police.
Wow.
And stop them from corporate strike breakers.
That's epic.
That's epic. And you know what that also shows me, dude? There is a real genuine point to electoral politics. Because when you have the right people in office, they're going to help you with these types of organization, mass movements.
Yes.
Right? Think of FDR caving to MLK and voting for the Civil Rights Act. Think of Governor Murphy in Michigan in 1936 sending the National Guard in to defend the workers. Think about FDR denying his vice presidential plea to send in the army.
Yeah.
It matters, man.
Totally.
So that's just Flint, Michigan. Eventually, the workers, because of this strike, got a 5% raise increase, and they were able to talk about the union over lunch breaks. And because they got that right, 100,000 UAW members were signed up over the next year.
Oh my God. It's amazing.
It's amazing. So Flint, Michigan was just craziness, dude.
Yeah.
Craziness.
That's super cool. You might, I think you still have more
On
than
Flint?
me. Yeah. Or in this period. I don't have a ton between 35 and the end of the war.
Oh, good. I have a lot on the 30s, so that's perfect. That fills in a lot of my gaps. So after they take down General Motors, right, they now switch focus. They're going to now target Ford. And Ford is way more organized than General Motors. Ford has espionage rings set up. They have private investigators following union organizers around the state. They have violence prepared to quell any type of union action, and this culminates in the Battle of the Overpass. It's crazy that we have names for these types of moments in our history.
Yeah.
When it's just people looking to get better pay for their work.
That is what's wild to me. Like, all of this is driven by just the profit motive.
It's all it is.
And it's so funny because, like, my general outlook on the world is to be less engaged by money or, like, driven by it.
Yeah.
And so at some level it seems silly to me, but you can't look at it as silly if it's driving this kind of action, this kind of violence, if it's affecting people's lives and how they feel this much, even if you feel like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. These guys will do anything for $1.
Yeah.
And that'll include breaking the back of a union organizer. So UAW organizers at the GM plant decided to expand their union, and they started handing out pamphlets to 90,000 Ford workers as they were getting off work. Well, police and Ford private security quickly swarmed this group of people. Union organizers, including Walter Reuther, who we'll get back to, he and Richard Frankenstein, another one of these UAW organizers, were asked by a Detroit newspaper photographer to pose for a picture over the overpass. And when they posed, the Ford policemen and Ford private security attacked and came up behind them and beat both of the men. They beat 40 men and actually broke one of the men's backs.
Wow.
Ford then tried to attack the media and destroy the pictures of the attack that the Detroit news photographer took, but the news outlet was able to escape the Ford police and publish them the next day.
Wow.
It's insane to me that this happened. But you know what happened after this? This only helped the UAW in the media, because right after this, in 1941, so after this led to a strike in 1941, which then concluded with a signed contract between Ford and the UAW. Now, that means Ford, GM, and I skipped over Chrysler, but Chrysler wasn't as dramatic. Chrysler, that was the invention of the Big Three. 1941. That's when the Big Three is formed.
Okay.
And so in 1946, I think I'll have this, and then I'll kick it to you.
Okay.
So in 1946, Walter Reuther, the guy who was just attacked at the Battle of the Overpass, becomes president of the United Auto Workers. Yeah. Well, who is Walter Reuther? Walter Reuther was a militant labor organizer in our history. He actually had some associations to the Socialist Party in his youth. And him and his brother, Victor Reuther, were very, very prominent actors in the labor movement. Even prior to becoming president, they used to work on building T model Fords in Henry Ford's plant. That's what they were doing.
Okay.
And eventually, Henry Ford sold his rights to the T model Ford to the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was going to start building T models.
I see.
And Walter and Victor took the opportunity to say, you know what, we'll go to the Soviet Union and we'll train these workers on how to build the Model Ts. So they go to the Soviet Union and they tour around there, and it's a really good experience for them. It really opens their eyes to a lot of things. But what they notice is that these factories were actually way worse than the American factories. And Walter Reuther starts writing letters to the Moscow Times trying to get them to force the local Soviet to change policy and have better worker regulations. Well, the Reuthers were doing this so much that they eventually started to form their own union outside of the Soviet, and they were blacklisted from the Soviet Union. They were kicked out of the country for leading a strike after demanding better working conditions. It is alleged Khrushchev, when he visited the United States, said Victor Reuther was the type of guy they killed in 1917, which is just...
It's wild.
It's such a badass thing to have said about you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it is. Okay, so I can pick up. I've got stuff about Walter and Victor, his brother. But first I want to set the stage of like, what does the American economy that the UAW now exists in look like?
Yeah.
So Walter and Victor Reuther, they're elected to lead the UAW in like 1946. So this is right after World War II, and the American economy was about to boom, right? Massively for decades. And a huge part of that was the automobile. Highways were being built rapidly. Everyone now was getting a car. There had actually been a little bit of a dip in households owning cars during the war because the materials like steel and rubber they needed to go to the military rather than to civilians. But now they were completely freed up, right? And so in this kind of environment, you have GM, the American car maker, being the top company on the Fortune 500 in its first ever iteration in 1955. And then it topped the list for 37 of the next 45 years.
That's insane.
It was the number one Fortune 500 company.
Wow.
So the automobile industry was just the peak of the U.S. economy, right? And that meant that the UAW had more power over how employees were treated in the American economy than anyone else. It didn't only create contracts for the auto workers, but it also trickled down into employees of all the supplier companies, right? Rubber suppliers, glass, steel, copper, aluminum manufacturers. They looked to the UAW, and those employees said, hey, look at how well they're treating their workers. Mm-hmm. We want to be treated just as well.
Yeah.
So then you have Victor and Walter Reuther coming in 1947. They take control, and they're pretty good leaders of the union, right? They achieve really big salary raises, health insurance, pensions, supplements to unemployment insurance, paid vacations. So they're treating their workers pretty well, but their faction, the administration caucus is what they're called, they stuck to a relatively narrow lane of increasing the standards of living for their employees, which means what they left off the table was a say in how management ran their plants. And this meant that working conditions were often dangerous and oppressive, even though the workers were getting more money and better benefits. So the other thing that the Reuthers did is they cracked down on opposition hard. The administration caucus ran the UAW as like a one-party state for decades. And actually up until the election earlier this year to get Sean Fain as the president. So they took down all of their enemies. They used intimidation tactics. And the funny thing about you saying that they had socialist involvement early on and then visited the Soviet Union and said that their factories weren't good enough is that the Reuthers used Red Scare tactics to put down their rivals within the union when they were there. It was like someone called Walter Reuther the McCarthy of the UAW.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so this is how they discredited any competition that they had in the union. They ruled with an iron fist.
Yeah.
And I've talked before about how it's okay, I think, for people in power to consolidate a lot of that power if they use it wisely. The problem is eventually leadership changes, right? Eventually it's not Walter and Victor Reuther who who have successfully raised standards of living for their employees. Eventually, it changes. And what happens is in 1970, okay, so in the 1970s, the economy starts to decline.
Yes.
Right?
Before the 1970 break.
Yeah.
I want to call out the 1947 strike.
Okay.
After World War II.
Yeah.
Because it was one of the largest strikes in American history. This was right after World War II, like you were talking about. Walter Reuther just got elected, and so he leads this strike. 320,000 workers go on strike, and they have the initial goal of a 30% wage increase. This doesn't just stop there, and by 1947, the goal expands. Sorry, I meant to say 1945 before, not 35. But in 1947, the goal is expanding. And the groundbreaking result is a cost of living increase, which is the first time this has ever happened in American history. The Reuther brothers and the UAW invents the cost of living increase, where it's your wages get increased by inflation every year. The end of the strike, the workers will have the right to bargain over health benefits, unemployment benefits, pension benefits, expanded vacation time, and rises in wages. And what this becomes known as, it's called Reuther's Treaty of Detroit.
Yes.
And it's the basis of the modern day middle class lifestyle. You think about all the benefits you get when you sign on to your employment offer letter. The first things you read about are what's my retirement account? How many vacation days do I get off? What's the health insurance like? That's because of the UAW's work in the 40s.
But you know what's funny? Is I read about the Treaty of Detroit as well.
Okay.
And the automakers saw that as a price they absolutely were willing and happy to pay.
Wow.
Because again, the unions didn't have any say in how they ran the companies.
Wow, this is really interesting to me because
Yeah.
you know my position is, my whole thing is that they need more power to run the companies.
Exactly. And they gave that up. And specifically cracked down on any union activity that tried to get more of that. In 1973, there was a wildcat strike that shut down one of Chrysler's plants to protest unsafe working conditions. And the UAW vice president sent over 1,000 administration caucus loyalists with baseball bats and pipes to beat the strike leaders at the local plant.
God.
Okay? They ruled this thing like mobsters.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, they were not okay with the union not falling into line with them and only negotiating with companies strictly on the administration caucus's terms. Okay, so this becomes really important, and the union really starts to get weakened in the 70s. After stagflation, with a struggling economy, the UAW makes concessions, okay? Chrysler, it's in really bad shape. It looks like it's about to go bankrupt. And Chrysler's looking for a bailout from the government. They ask for a $1.5 billion loan to stay in business. And the government says yes, but on the condition that Chrysler has $2 billion in savings, so the government can know that it can make good on the loan. $1 billion of those savings come out of UAW concessions, okay? And the UAW agrees to it because the union leaders are still treated super well. And because when you have a one-party system, they're able to consolidate the power and the money and the comfort up to the top, and then they'll do whatever they can to keep it for themselves. That's what's happened. That's what happened for decades in the union. And I'm going to keep talking about how that went. So in return for the concessions, UAW leaders asked for what are called joint programs, okay? This is where union leaders could assign certain members to positions away from the factory. They were called training programs, okay? And they would happen in these super nice facilities, beautiful buildings, mahogany furniture inside. And it's like, okay, so you union workers who are loyal to the administration caucus, we're going to take you out of these shitty factories. We're going to put you at this cushy desk job, and you're going to be in this joint training program where you're just bringing up the new generation of workers. And so they were rewarding people who were loyal to the administration caucus. These joint programs were funded by both the UAW and the automakers, and eventually the UAW was given company credit cards to be able to use the money in these jointly funded programs. And then it became a source of personal enrichment for union leaders. One of the executives from the automakers said, if you see anything you want, use the company card. When union leaders didn't take from the companies, they could take directly from their members. Former UAW presidents were part of a cadre of officials who embezzled more than $1 million from the UAW. When one retired UAW staff member said, when someone in a one-party state decides to steal money, the tendency is not to expose the culprit, but to cover it up so it doesn't look bad on the caucus or the union. Okay, so the automakers saw the joint programs as an opportunity to extract concessions from the union because they could gift this to the union leaders who now didn't really care about how the union workers got treated, right? And they had to pay much, much less because of that. And then, so as this union is weakened, we were just talking about them as the vanguard of unions in the country, right? And all of these other manufacturing employees would look at the UAW and follow their lead to bargain for better conditions for them. And the same thing, of course, happens when the UAW gets less power. Now all employees across the US have less to work with as far as their own bargaining. And this, of course, is really important in the context of an American auto industry that is more saturated by foreign manufacturers.
Yes, that's super important. In the 70s, a lot of foreign manufacturers move in, and they move to the South. They build a lot of plants in the South where the UAW has like no reach. And they also have very, very terrible labor laws in the South.
Yes, the state governments are super anti-union. They give generous subsidies to the companies. So you have like BMW coming to South Carolina. You've got Toyota with factories in the South. You got Volvo with factories in the South. And this gets to the point where even now, only 16% of auto workers are in unions, right? And so now, instead of the union having all this power to push their power, or to push how much say they have in the company and to push their own living conditions further up, instead the big three, the negotiators for the companies, are like, look at all of these companies that don't have unions. The only way we can compete with them is for you to make concessions. It's for you to allow us to pay you less, to give you worse conditions. And so this balance has completely shifted. And of course, part of this is the tiered wage system, which we've now talked about for several weeks on this show, where when the recession came in 2007, 2008, union leaders gave up the ability for all workers to be paid equally and instead said, okay, we'll pay workers who have been here longer more money and pay workers that have been here for less time less money, even though they're doing the exact same jobs. So this keeps building up. Okay? Sorry, I'm on a roll.
No, you're good. The only thing I would add here is that UAW membership starts dropping. So like it peaks in 1970 something at like 1.5 million, and it just declines rapidly from there. And today we're around 400,000, 391,000 members.
Yeah, which is extremely sad.
So
hopefully
sad.
We'll be seeing a turnaround.
Hopefully.
But so this is building up. 2007, we get tiered wage system. Discontent is building among the rank and file, right? In 2015, it built up so much that they voted against a contract agreed upon by leadership. That almost never happens. Never, right? And leadership would make sure it never happened, because if they came with a contract that the rank and file didn't like, they would just come back and say, we tried again, but here's the same contract. That's the best we could get. And they would keep wearing them down until the union members just thought, we can't get any better. There's no point in resisting. There's no point in fighting for change. We're just going to take whatever we can get. And then something happened in 2019 where there was a federal probe into corruption in the UAW. And they find that UAW officials spent over $1 million of union money from 2014 to 2018.
Wow.
One former president got the union to build him a $1.1 million lakeside cabin just because he was a member of the administration caucus, and he proposed this at one of their meetings. And since it was just we're pandering to the leaders, they accepted it right on its face.
Jesus Christ.
Another former president, Gary Jones, had his house raided by the FBI, and they found wads of cash in his garage that he had embezzled from the union.
What?
So finally, the union members are galvanized to make change. And that is how we got where we are today. So we see another faction finally rise up within the UAW, which is called UAWD, United Auto Workers for Democracy. And they're promising no concessions and stronger negotiating tactics. They ran our boy, Shawn Fain, as president. He won his election by less than 1,000 votes.
So close.
In a race where over 130,000 people voted. So super close, an absolutely huge victory. And a big part of this was because the UAWD succeeded in bringing together white-collar workers and blue-collar workers to push their agenda at these conferences, basically, where the UAW wasn't run really democratically for a while. It was run by delegates from different people at local factories in local districts. And so since the administration caucus had such power, usually they would shut down anyone in these local districts that would oppose them. But by bringing together these different types of workers, the UAWD was actually able to get some of its proposals on the ballot, including the initiative to make leadership voting one person, one vote. And that's how we were eventually able to get Shawn Fain.
That's unbelievable.
Yes.
I knew the election was close, man, but that's out of House of Cards.
Yeah. This story is absolutely crazy. I was like mind blown when I was reading about it.
God, the amount of respect I have for Shawn Fain after that, right?
I know. And I'll just reiterate what Shawn Fain just won. 11% raise off the bat, 25% in the 4.5 years to come. Ability to strike when plants are threatened to close. And this is huge because this is what we're talking about as far as having a say in how the companies are run, right? That's exactly what you're looking for. That's exactly what the administration caucus never allowed. And now the workers are going to have a say.
Hell
it's
yeah.
fantastic.
God, it's so good.
Yeah.
Go. I was going to zoom out for unions generally. If you have any more in UAW.
No, that's what I want you to do.
So unions are having a moment in America right now, and it's really amazing to see.
Yeah.
Gallup keeps track of the approval or disapproval of labor unions, and currently 67% of Americans have a positive view of organized labor. That is the highest since 1967.
Can I just say, this is another perfect example of why it feels just like a messaging problem for Biden.
So
because
true.
he is so pro-union, and he's done things that help unions so much.
So much.
You need to get people to understand that. They love unions. They're pro-union. They should love you.
That's what I was saying in the last episode. It's awesome how good of a job he's doing, appointing good people to the NLRB.
Yes.
Where is your ads about it? Where is your ads about you on the picket line with the UAW? Where is that ad?
Yes, exactly. It's like it's a perfect photo op.
Perfect.
Too. It's perfect.
God.
Okay.
So now, why are unions having such a great moment in America right now? Well, I want to take us back to 2021 with the end of COVID, or us coming out of COVID.
Okay.
And this thing trends on social media called Striketober. It's kind of sort of a joke. It's a kind of like a lot of LARPy socialists online saying Striketober. And then all of a sudden, the AFL-CIO picks it up, and the UAW picks it up, and SAG-AFTRA, the writers, pick it up. And a lot of Hollywood guys pick it up. And then Nabisco picks it up. And you're like, wait a second. Is this a thing? And then it starts getting on the news. And the news starts talking about Striketober. And 25,000 workers go on strike in the month of October in 2021. This is coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And economists regard this as a general response to the Great Resignation. Or after COVID-19, workers felt they had a lot more power as the labor participation rate was lower. Mm-hmm. And there were less people in the labor force, more demand for labor, and workers had the economic ability to bargain more for better wages. And specifically, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed poor working conditions across the United States, and that workers really felt that the system was rigged against them, and they also felt that their jobs were essential. Do you remember that moment in 2020 and 2021 where we called people who went to work during the pandemic essential workers? Well, all those people felt essential for the first time in their lives, and they were going to demand to be paid like somebody who's essential, as they rightfully should be. So strikes broke out in Hollywood, Nabisco, Kellogg, John Deere. John Deere was a massive strike, a massive victory for the workers in John Deere and Kellogg's. I remember both of those. There were healthcare nurse strikes over in Worcester, Massachusetts, even. There were McDonald's strikes. There were strikes across higher education and more. And what's interesting is at this point in 2021, Joe Biden, his first year president, he does not support the striking workers. He said specifically that his administration would not get in the middle of negotiations. And that all changes because over the course of the next 2 years, there was only an explosion of union support and of union activity, which culminates into the UAW strike, which culminates into the writers-actors strike. And through 2021 through 2022, the number of union jobs were added. We added 200,000 new union jobs between 2021 and 2022. The overall percent of workers represented by unions fell from 11.6 to 11.3, but that's because the rate of non-union jobs outgrew the rate of union jobs growing. But it's still good that union jobs are on the rise at least. And these union jobs were growing in some interesting states. 40,000 union jobs in Alabama and 72,000 union jobs in Texas. These are not union-friendly states, and they grew there nonetheless.
Yeah.
And there is more and more interest among the American population in joining a union. In 2017, half of the country, 48% of workers, would vote to unionize their workplace if they could. This, compare this to numbers from 1977, where that number was 32%. That's a massive increase.
Yeah.
And now, since the rise of unionization and more labor organization since 2017, I guarantee you that 48% number is higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Dude, I just love, there's nothing more energetic than people fighting for what they're worth.
I know. Well, just from labor taking the money from management, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like, I just think about I always think about the stock buybacks
Oh,
that
I'll never.
I hope will not happen anymore because this money will be going to workers, right?
And I think that grows our economy faster. Because,
way faster.
Way faster, because
It
consumption.
produces things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not rent seeking. Like it's the easiest economic equation in the world. Yeah.
So that's the history of the UAW.
Yeah.
Their ups, their downs, and their righteous return to glory.
Oh my God. After like 40 years, 50 years of a weakened union. And now it's just amazing that we are sitting here and we're watching like the reinvigoration of the labor movement across the country.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. It's an amazing thing to live through, and it's an amazing thing to support.
Yeah.
To show our support to show our solidarity to donate to their strike funds. It's such an honor to be a part of that.
Yeah.
You know?
And if you know anyone or if you personally can get involved in any way, please do, because there is no better time.
No better time. We will be providing resources in episodes to come on how to go about getting involved in union activity and also political activity as elections come near. And we will be discussing and giving you guys resources to get involved, because that's what this is all about. So stay tuned for that.
Absolutely.
I want to now end on what the UAW has done for the workers today. So we've gone over what they've won in their specific agreements, right? Cost of living adjustments are back. 35% raises or 32% raises over the course of the next 4.5 years as the term of the contract. They won better retirement accounts. They've won better working conditions. They've run the right to strike for closing plants.
No tiered wages.
They won no tiered wages. So the lowest paid worker is going to go from making 18 an hour to 40 an hour. Amazing progress.
Awesome.
But you know what else is amazing about this? Is that it's not just affecting the UAW workers. It's affecting all the workers in the auto industry. This is what happens when workers fight for their rights every company gets scared that their companies are going to do the same. So days after the UAW won their tentative deals with the big three, Toyota says it is boosting its top pay to $34.80 an hour, cutting wage progression to 4 years from 8 years, and is increasing PTO for all of its employees.
Okay, and I want to very specifically say, this is good.
Great.
For any Toyota workers.
I'm happy
and
you got
should
it.
Absolutely not be satisfied with it. And you should absolutely not allow this to appease you to not unionize.
This is their tactic to get you not militant, to get you feeling like you're not essential, to get you feeling like you don't deserve more.
Yeah.
This is them throwing pennies at the problem. It's time for you to get the whole damn dime.
Yes. Don't. And I know. I can imagine, right? Like these are people who are dealing with managers who they now feel more connected to because they were just given raises. But I'm sorry, because these companies are trying to manipulate you through those people.
Absolutely.
Even if your manager isn't the one who this raise came down through, I'm sorry. It is not only better for you, but it is better for the entire country's economy.
So much better.
To work to unionize.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these wages are nothing personal. If you got these wages, it's not because you were a good worker, dude. It's because they're afraid of you realizing that your labor is worth so much more than what they're paying you.
Yes.
That's what they're afraid of.
Yeah.
And Bloomberg did a study, and they're analyzing the wage increases, and they have found that the U.S. workers are getting record-breaking wage hikes this year because of strategic strikes and stunning contract wins. That's their adjective, not mine.
Yeah.
The result is a boost in middle-income wages and a shift in the balance of power between companies and their employees. Between 1988 and 2023, right? So 1988, average wage increases were around 4%. In the 2000s, in the 2010s, it went all the way down to 1%. 2% was the average throughout the 2010s. This year, it's over 6% wage increases.
It's enormous.
That's because of wage activity. Yeah. Unbelievable
Higher
progress.
than we've seen in 30 years.
Higher than we've seen in 30 years. And that just goes to show you the true power of organized labor. Yeah. So now, Toyota, they're throwing pennies at the problem, hoping that it'll go away. Well, what's happening to Tesla? For the first time in Tesla's history, they are being affected by a strike. Not a strike in the United States, but a strike in Sweden. The strike was called by the industrial labor union IF Metall. The union's decision follows 5 years of refusal by Tesla's Swedish subsidiary to negotiate to a collective bargaining agreement between the employees and repair shops across the company.
Yeah, this is kind of like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, because Tesla has a policy of not collective bargaining with any of its plants, any of the employees at its plants. But meanwhile, in Sweden, the vast majority of their workers are unionized.
Yep.
So they're not just going to lay down and let Tesla do this to them.
Absolutely not. There are 470 workers in 16 cities that will be affected in this next phase of striking, and it's only expanding out. Yeah. This is big, as Tesla is currently Sweden's top selling car.
Yeah.
So this is putting a lot of strain on one of their bigger markets here. And Sweden has a history of taking these companies to task. In 1995, Toys R Us entered Sweden, and Toys R Us initially refused to sign a collective bargaining agreement to the retail union. Totally was not going to do it. Eventually, the company had to concede after 3 months of labor strife. This included solidarity strikes, which means that other unions blocked all deliveries, garbage collection, postal services, bank payments, and vital part of the firm's operation in the country.
That is so cool.
Solidarity strikes are illegal in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Sit-down strikes are also illegal now in the United States.
Okay, Biden administration, get on that.
Get on that shit, man.
This
please.
is just such a good example, though, of why there, like, from a philosophical perspective, so often you hear that competition is the thing that drives an economy. Well, this is an example of how collectivization drives an economy and how collectivization lifts people up. There's an idea that like unions are wage cartels that make people get paid less than they're worth. No, this is what people are worth. Okay, this is how you prevent companies from siphoning away all worker power and not recognizing what they have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think, sorry.
No, you go.
No, you go.
Tesla isn't only facing trouble in Sweden, they're also facing this trouble in Germany. Tesla has a booming factory in Germany, and they are forced to boost pay in this German plant amid an aggressive unionization drive, a move that comes as Chief Executive Elon Musk may face similar organizing challenges in the United States per Bloomberg. So this is amazing. This is like an international movement to unionize Tesla.
Yeah.
And it's just so amazing to see it. And the United States is going to get on this. Sean Fain already says that they're going to get on this.
Yeah.
And the next 2 years are going to be an incredible moment. And they need to have our full support, our full solidarity. They're, man, UAW,
so exciting.
The people have your back 1,000%.